Teachers of Reddit, what's your most memorable "oh boy, that student definitely isn't going places" moment? Okay, so I had a student in middle school that couldn't read. That wasn't a huge deal. Kid had issues. Once he got angry at me and told me he was going to rip off my buttons. It may have been literal or figurative. Didn't matter. Remember, issues. It was my job to teach him to read. He should have already been in high school. He was 14 and in middle school. I worked individually with this kid every day. Finally, I just asked him what he was going to do for a living if he couldn't read and wouldn't try. He gave me a pretty standard answer. I'll play basketball or sell drugs. I should mention he was barely over 5 foot tall. I worried about him. He was my student for 2 years. Eventually he moved on and I switched to high school. So 20 years later I get curious. I remember most of my students and this kid had a name that stood out a bit. I Google his name hoping he won't be in prison. A lot of my former students are. I find him right away. He's a professional basketball player for Ukraine. Retired now but still, so good for him. Made himself proud. Quick edit. He turned 15 in middle school. He did learn how to read. He graduated and went to college. Apparently he struggled for a while, but he's human. His history was not ideal. I'm concerned about naming him because of his privacy. He played from 2006 to 2010. Cool. Gold. My father wasn't sure if I should go into education. Finally paying off. I'm late to the thread, but I have a winner. The class was an applied math course for high schoolers, and we held a paper airplane design contest. The rule was that you could use anything on the table to make your airplane, and that the person who threw this the farthest down the hallway would win. The table had all manner of things on it: printer paper, construction paper, tape, rulers, compasses, toothpicks, duct tape, paper clips, masking tape, a stapler, and even Elmer's glue. Well, the class went to work and for an hour designed some very interesting airplanes. Except for Tim. Tim sat quietly and chatted with his friends until about 30 seconds were left to build. Then he went up to the table, grabbed a few things, and sat back down to wait. When it came time to throw, it turned out that his airplane was a piece of paper wrapped around the stapler, while the lighter and more complex planes drifted to the side and landed early or hit the hallway walls. Tim's plane slammed straight into the door on the other end of the hall with a satisfying clunk. Tim's ridiculous creation beat everyone else out and won the contest easily while technically obeying the rules of the competition. I hope that guy ends up working for NASA. Edit. My other favorite student was a kid who ate a glue stick for $5. He figured it was edible because it said non-toxic. Technically correct, but so wrong. He had to go home due to the uncontrollable vomiting. I'm not sure if he was ever paid the $5. My third favorite was a middle schooler whose mom was dissed by another student in class. His reaction, not having any decent weapons on him, was to rip out the 3-ring part of a 3-ring binder and use the prongs to attack the other student's forearm. Unfortunately, that kid isn't going anywhere but juvie unless he can get help with his anger issues. Too bad, because it was an ingenious improvised weapon, and he could probably use that creativity some other way. This isn't really the kid's fault, more the parents, but my sister teaches in Hong Kong, generally 3 to 4 year olds, and she had this one kid, called Enzo if I remember right, kept acting out, completely ignoring my sister and her tar when they spoke to him, and doing badly in the classwork they are given. He also didn't speak, at all, tended to play by himself. So my sister called in his parents in to discuss it, voiced her concerns that there might be behavioral problems, maybe something deeper seated. His parents then confided in her that it's probably not that, more that the kid didn't speak a lick of English or Cantonese, the 2 languages used in the school, and most of Hong Kong. They were both relatively affluent Italians, so they'd raised the kid speaking Italian and lied that he spoke English fluently so he could get admitted into the school, as it was a requirement that they have a basic understanding. My sister raised her concerns with the principal after she had the meeting, and they responded to just moving the kid to another class. She said she still Sees him sitting alone during lunch breaks. I really feel for the kid though. He's only young, and he's pretty much been alienated, and won't learn properly, because his parents are so dead set on shoving him into the most expensive school, assuming he'll learn well. Been a history teacher for 3 months, and was teaching about the middle colonies, and how it was the breadbasket of America. The next day as a warm-up I ask what the breadbasket is. She rose her hand, and without her even skipping a beat starts going off about how I'm so dumb because it's called the chicken basket, where you get your tenders 2 sides and it also comes with bread, but that isn't what it's called. This poor girl has a lot more stories. This one is the one that stands out to me the most. Point edit. Sorry guys, took a nap because I'm trying to enjoy my vacation. Point other stories include wondering how Obama was the first black president because she thought Abraham Lincoln was black. Her reasoning behind it was that was really tall. Granted she's also black, yeah. Along with that I've had to explain that we did have color back then. She couldn't believe that people before the 1950s still had color as only the TVs and photos were black and white. She constantly calls people cockatoos. 3 weeks ago she asked which history I am teaching. Point I honestly don't know if I really suck as a teacher or it's her. Mind you guys, I do teach 8th grade US history. I wanted to believe all kids are smart, but I'm just slowly not going to hold on to that belief anymore. These are the highlights. Ask again next year and I'll have stories from multiple kids I want to reap in that sweet karma. My sister is a teacher for a local school. Like a great many teachers, she's also responsible for a form group, in this case, a rowdy and rambunctious group of 15-year-olds she'd inherited from a newly retired teacher. Some kids stand out more than others, and not always for the right reasons. The epitome of that rule existed in my sister's form group. She had the misfortune to be called Xena by her Tumblr feminist mother, and Xena herself had followed firmly in her mother's footsteps. She was considered unpopular, and certainly the other kids were unfair and cruel, but she didn't help matters herself. My sister has told many stories of Xena, up to and including the time she spontaneously began speaking in an accent, which sounded like the bastard child of a Pakistani accent, Irish, and a speech impediment. The accent vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared over the course of the lunch hour. The time she claimed powers of clairvoyance in chemistry. The kid torching pencils with a Bunsen burner apparently never particularly cared if their great aunt Doreen wanted to warn them of misfortune. The time she shaved her head and refused to wear her uniform because it was stifling her creativity. John Cena meme was in full swing, and Xena had earned the nickname John Cena owing to her buzzcut and unfortunate head shape. Kids would hum his theme tune upon seeing Xena in the school. A memo was sent around the faculty concerning the matter, but half of the staff were convinced that John Cena was a politician. My sister was running improvisation drills when Xena broke in with one of her prime stories. She was the daughter of a Mauritian man named Jonathan, she said. Her skin was the color of milk, smooth and pale, a man of great importance. She'd been born in Mauritius and swiftly smuggled over to the UK with her mother, born and raised in England, as a newborn. There was a beat of stunned, awkward silence, until a particular sheet of a child screeched, "John Cena," and slammed his mate's head into the desk. Of course I will post the classic. Just look up Kevin Reddit. Only Reddit dogs will remember Kevin. It's not uncommon as a teacher to have students who are a bit behind the curve in certain aspects, but 99.99999% of the time they are keen on something. They might not understand how to identify a noun or what theme is, but they somehow know how to make a mean plate of nachos. You learn pretty quick to not judge fish for their tree climbing ability, yeah no? I thought this was the rule when I was teaching, until I met Kevin. Kevin isn't his real name, but it doesn't matter, because he can't spell it anyway. Kevin was a student of mine during my last year of teaching. He came to my classroom with very little to show for his academic past. He had moved a few times, and thus was missing a lot of typical test scores that we used to try and ballpark their ability. Don't worry, it was a ballpark. We didn't make major decisions until we actually had a chance to talk and work with a student for a bit. I thought that's fine. I'll just do some one-on-one with Kevin and see what's up. One-on-one with Kevin was like conversing with someone who'd forgotten everything in a freak, if not impossible, amnesia incident. There was no evidence that he had learned anything past the 2nd grade, and now he was in 9th grade. Flabbergasted, I figured we needed to get more serious with this. If he was going to be in my class, I needed to know why and how. I decided to meet with him, his guidance counselor, his parents, and another teacher to see what was really going on. This is where it all became clear. It was by some incredible fluke that his family hadn't been wiped off the face of the earth years ago. Odds are his entire heritage was based on blind luck and some type of sick divine intervention that saves his family every time a threat presents itself. Kevin was the genetic pinnacle of this null achievement. Even my instructional lead, a woman who could find a redeeming tray in a Balrog, failed to see any reason this kid or his family should be alive today. So here's a list of events that made it abundantly clear that God exists, and he's laughing uncontrollably. Kevin frequently forgot when/where class was. On more than one occasion, I had to retrieve him from other classrooms. Kevin ate an entire 24-pack of crayons, puked, and then did it again the next day. This is 9th grade. I have no idea where he got crayons. Kevin's dad wrote tuition checks and mailed them to me, his English teacher. This was a public school. When I gave it back to Kevin, voided, to give to his dad with a brief note explaining that this is a public school, Kevin got in trouble for trying to spend it at 711 after school. Kevin was removed from the culinary arts program after leaving a cutting board on the gas stove and starting a fire twice. Kevin threw his lunch at the school resource officer and tried to run away. He ran into a door and insisted it wasn't him. Kevin stole my phone during class. I called it. It rang. He denied that it was ringing. Not that it wasn't his. Not that he did it. No, he denied that the phone was actually ringing. He tried it 3 times before the end of the year. Kevin called the basketball coach a faking beach during gym. Basketball tryouts were that afternoon. Kevin tried out. It didn't go well. Kevin's mom could never remember which school he went to. She missed several meetings because she drove to other schools, none of which he ever went to. Kevin tased himself in the neck before a football game. Kevin kept a bottle of orange Kool-Aid in his backpack for about 4 months. He thought it would turn into alcohol. He drank it during homeroom and threw up. Kevin said the N-word a lot. Kevin was white. The high school was 84% black. Kevin got beat up a lot. Kevin stole another student's iPhone and tried to sell it back to them. Kevin didn't understand that his grade was dependent on tests, quizzes, homework, class walk, and participation. Kevin finished his first semester with a 3% average. He tried to bribe me with $11. Kevin spit on a girl and said you should get out of those wet clothes. The girl was the Spanish student teacher. Kevin didn't know dogs and cats were different animals. Kevin tried to download Born onto a computer in the library at the circulation desk while he was logged on. Kevin asked a girl to prom. He was in 9th grade and freshmen don't go to prom by asking for her phone number and then texting her his address. Kevin got gum in his hair constantly. Kevin regularly tried to cheat on assignments by knocking the pile over, grabbing one before I had picked them all up, and then writing its name on it wherever there was room. Kevin had several allergies, but neither his parents nor he could remember what they were. They were very concerned that the holiday party at high school, we don't have those, would have peanuts. When they finally got a doctor's note, he was allergic to amoxicillin. Kevin and his parents took a trip to Nassau. How the fuck did they even get airline tickets and forgot all their luggage at home? I didn't believe him when he told me until I talked to him mom, who told me first thing when I saw her at the bi-weekly meeting. Kevin's grandfather apparently died in a chainsaw accident. I can only assume God was looking the other way that day. Oh boy. Just one. I teach high school, and every time I think I've heard the dumbest thing ever, it eventually gets topped. Here's a few shining examples. I had a student ask me why he didn't die in his sleep because he wasn't awake to remember to breath. He had no idea what involuntary functions were and said he'd been concentrating on his breathing since he could remember, and every night he went to bed terrified that he was going to die. I had a student get caught stealing a TV from someone's house. The police literally showed up and caught him walking out the door holding the TV. He couldn't understand how they found him so fast. Idiot was wearing an ankle bracelet and was on house arrest at the time. They knew the moment he left his yard. I had a student ask me what happened to Hitler after WW2. I very jokingly said that they turned him into a zombie and keep him in prison under the Pentagon. A few minutes later this girl is bawling her eyeballs out. I ask her why, and between sobs she claims she's terrified that he'll get out and do it again. The class was stunned. I was like, yo, zombies aren't real. Yes they are, I saw them on TV. This girl was 17. I had a girl proudly announce one day that her mama told her when she was little that she'd have big memories if she ate chicken. So she ate chicken every day, even though she didn't like it, but boy did it work. A young gentleman behind her calmly asked what would happen if she had eaten fish. I was teaching The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe, and I was explaining that the name of the cat Pluto comes from the Roman name for the Greek god Hades. I went through our planets and told them what god each was named after and why. When I got done this one kid accusingly announced to the class that's in Genesis. If you people read your Bible you'd know this, literally. Every time I teach Greek mythology as a prelude to Oedipus there's at least one kid, even in the honors classes, who asks me if this is real. I have a lot more of these stories. Edit. People wanted to hear more. I'll include things outside the realm of merely stupid and in the realm of holy crap that's sad. I had a student that thought that our desks didn't rot because they were made out of wood and engaged in photosynthesis. He refused to believe that photosynthesis occurred in the leaves because his science teacher told him trees did it, and he flat out just wouldn't believe the truth. Best part is that the desks were a heavy plastic. I had a student who was not allowed to walk the halls by herself. She had to be escorted by a staff member at all times between classes because she'd slip into the bathroom and start faking people. Just faking anyone. I had another female student who was paying guys $20 to let her blow them in the bathroom. One of my apps was like, I have no idea what I would do as a high school boy. She's ugly as sin, but holy shit is that economical. This same girl later told me that she was working illegally, 15 years old, as a stripper at a particular club, and gave me details about the back room that I happened to know were accurate and offered to bang me for free if I went there. I reported her to social services pretty much immediately after I got done being nauseated. I had another student pour an entire bottle of pills into a container of frosting and start chowing down on it in an attempt to commit suicide. Luckily, I realized what she was doing and was able to get medical attention. She did not die. I had a kid pull out a fifth of vodka and a Borno mag in class. He was sent to the principal's office. He told the principal that we could keep the vodka, but needed that Borno mag back for later. Put on us kids into groups of 4. One group had 5 kids. The assignment involved picking a character in the story we read and writing a letter to another group member as their character. This kid in the group of 5 stood me down that in a group of 5, there was no way for everyone to write a different person. I calmly said, just pass left. He said that'll work for the first, but what about the response? Me, pass right when you are done. For some reason he couldn't grasp this concept, that passing right sends the reply back to the proper person who got the original letter. I wasted 5 minutes with his classmates yelling at him before I made them physically pass things left, and then, right before he blushed with embarrassment and understood. That's enough for now. I have more, always so many more. Not a teacher, but my high school class had a few people like this. I, of course, will not use their real names. Chad had a great F average in every class, was one of my class's biggest bullies, and was one of the most generally hated people in the whole school. He was constantly high in class, either on meth or weed. The thing that really did it in was when I overheard him and a couple of his friends talking while they smoked in the bathroom. His plan was to take 2 extra suitcases with him on his trip to Mexico and stuff them with cheap steroids from various dealers in Mexico. He claimed that the border guards never check stuff from white people. While this point can be argued, it is neither here nor there. Chad would be flying to Mexico. Sam would probably be curious why there are 2 suitcases filled with just pill bottles. Not to mention going through customs with that. Brad was a general dumbass. My favorite quote from him was when he asked his friend which are the uppers and which are the downers. When the friend didn't know, Brad said fuck it and took the whole handful. Physical science was an interesting class. I had both him and his friend as partners. I also had Brad in my English class. Our big project of the year was to make a model of something from the Elizabethan era and write a paper on it. Being the only non-druggie that would talk to him, I was forced to be his partner. I made an amazing model of a Spanish Armada galleon and wrote a great paper of all their victories up until the English defeated them. I say I did all that because he just sat there drooling due to the downers. Now, I didn't tell my teacher this. I'd rather just present what we did and get it over with. She was not about that. Brad and I got in front of the class. She gets up, pulls the outline out of my hand, tells me to sit, and tells Brad to give the presentation. You have not lived until you see a guy on 4 downers try to make a presentation on naval warfare. I did feel bad though. He deserved the F, but not the public humiliation. He didn't learn from it, though. Something like this happened in every class I had him in up until late senior year. Danny was about as dumb as they come. I never really had many conversations with her, but one event stands out. It was my class's senior year. They released the rankings and Danny was 150 out of 150. Now, she took this as she was top of the class. She went around and showed anyone that would listen. The worst part of this is, she has no learning disabilities or anything from holding her back. I, myself, have a few and got to know everyone in my grade that has them as well. She was not one of those people. Someone finally had the nerve to tell her she was last in the class. I don't know the logic going through her head. She had a 1.5 GPA. They were being nice to let her graduate as you require a 2.0 to graduate. I think she thought the rest of us were dumber than her. I did hear from her friends that she had a superiority complex, so maybe that is why Pointien was my friend. He sort of just stuck to my group and never went away. He thought we were all under him and we all thought he was a dumbass. Classic high school bullshit. The past 3 I mentioned were bad, but Ian may be the worst. Wasted potential should be his middle name. He has the intelligence of someone that could make a 3.5 at the worst if he tried. He never tried. I don't mean guessing on tests or not studying. He would just skip class because he hated tests. The teachers would always try and let him make up the test, but he never did. He would always complain about how stupid school was and how he doesn't need it because he will study quantum physics in college. He dropped out of college his freshman year because he was not going to pay to be taught by people who are stupider than me. He graduated HS with a 1.7. His mom begged them to let him graduate because she couldn't afford to send him and his brother to school at the same time and a 14 on the act. He was shocked that he didn't get into any good colleges. He now works on a farm, only talks to me when his better friends don't have drugs, and he generally hates life. Final story, because I want to end on a good note. Shelly was 16 when she got pregnant. The husband was part of the group that hangs out with Chad from the first story in this comment. She was a beach to the highest degree, would only talk to those on her popularity status, and would bully people. She got pregnant and had the child. At my HS, they only allow you excuse days when you are too pregnant to walk or are in labor. It was some bullshit. She had to come to school and get ridiculed every day. This changed her. She went from a beach and middle ground student to a delightful person and a B student. She is a junior in college now, is raising the kid, and is now a god tier human. There are so many more I can think of. My Catholic high school had so many characters. Some good and some bad. I'm not a teacher, but my high school senior class had its very own Kevin. And I'm pretty sure, if the teacher of that class Reddited, she'd be posting all over here about this kid. I'm going to call him Jumpy after Jumpy from Persona 3. Jumpy was one of those neighborhood rat type kids, in spite of the fact that we all live in a white bread suburb that has no equivalent of a hood whatsoever. He'd come to school dressed in the same oversized Elmo hoodie every day and spout off hood talk and rap lyrics. Yes, Elmo. From Sesame Street. This kid would get up and walk out of class frequently, and for no real reason at all. He'd legit just decide he didn't want to do class today and run out of class. Or he'd see someone he didn't like outside the door and get up and run after him. Or he'd see someone he did like outside the door and just walk out of class to go hang with them. He did this during tests and oftentimes just plain did not show up for the tests. How he even passed enough to graduate at all is a mystery. You could commonly find him wandering around the halls during any given class. He interrupted a unit on Beowulf to talk about what he did in Red Dead Redemption the night before. When the teacher asked what that had to do with anything, he said, well, it's from back in the day. Junpei would regularly interrupt the lessons to spew out completely random and irrelevant rap lyrics while bobbing his head around, and then go completely silent until the next impromptu rap or irrelevant shitty comment. Junpei once asked the teacher, a young attractive lady fresh out of college, to come to his house so he could put his big black dick inside of her. He also regularly called her a MILF, even though she was not a mother. He had the balls to do this loudly, to her face, in class. I'm sure I don't even need to tell you Junpei never did the assignments or the homework. And when he bothered to show up for tests at all, he tried to cheat. Junpei would go up and steal pens off my desk. When I gave him no reaction and took out one of my spare pens, I always carried a whole box full of them to school because I dropped them a lot. He'd go back and silently slip it back onto my desk. I guess he expected me to chase after him or some shit. Junpei won prom king at the senior prom, and when I found that out, I did not go to the senior prom, only the junior. I actually asked what the fuck everyone was smoking when they made that pic. Turns out, they did it as a joke. And everyone told him the next day, you know, we voted you prom king because we thought it would be funny because you're such a douchebag. That sobered him up quite a bit. Junpei used to talk tough and start fights, but he was a weak little thing who was very easily put in his place. One of the greatest things that ever happened involving Junpei was when he went up to this girl and started harassing the shit out of her, and she pushed him into a desk, causing him to go holy shit and tuck his tail between his legs and leave. She did not get in trouble for this, purely because the teacher saw that he was harassing her. I don't know how Junpei managed to graduate high school or where he is now, and I do not care. Okay, so classmate here, and if my professor saw this he'd be posting, so in his stead this one kid in my dendrology class. We will call him C. Now C started off okay in this class. He was weird and didn't get social cues. Well, C seemed fine, maybe just a little autistic. But later he started bragging he failed this class last semester. Not just saying it, but literally bragging that he failed. He thought it was a prize point anyways. He continues to do so for the first few months or so. Throughout these months he also comes up during field quizzes and asks, hey, what's this tree or that was a completely obvious it's not tree, right? Then we have Latin quizzes for the scientific names of these trees, and this faker is sitting in front of the tower with his phone in his lap cheating on the quiz. Every single class so mid-semester comes, and he gets an email from our professor saying he needs to drop this class or he will fail it. Good guy professor trying to save his grade, but he instead brags about it and decides, nah, I'll keep going, I've already failed once, it's fine. Well, he gets more emails and gets called out in class when he brags about getting 1 out of 15 trees right, and when he gets caught cheating again. Anyways, end of semester comes and he doesn't show up to the triad final nor the written management final. I haven't seen him since, but I've seen his little car around town. It's hard to miss with the Resident Evil 4 logos all over it and the multiple bloody zombies on it. I don't think he is going anywhere in life. I feel sorry for him, but yet again he was given multiple chances to fix some problems, but decided not to, so I'm not sure I really care. I have one from yesterday, but it was more, oh boy, that student is going places, but where? We'll call him Professor X. He's 11 and incredibly smart, but his moral compass doesn't point north. For example, last year his class took a How Machiavellian Are You? Quiz in their cultural studies class, and he scored a 9/10 point anyway. Professor X was doing an internet activity about cyberbullying, and the worksheet asked him to write advice/message to a target, bystander, and cyberbully. When he got to bystander, he flipped out. PX, why does the bystander have to do anything? He's not doing anything wrong. He might be afraid he'd get bullied too if he butts in and offends the target. Me. Said all of the Germans during World War II who did nothing as Hitler took all of the Jews away and killed them. Oh, it's not my problem. PX, they were probably too scared that they would get in trouble with the Germans and get sent away. too. Me. That's exactly the point. The reason Hitler was so successful is because practically no one stood up to them in Germany because they were too afraid and figured it wasn't their problem. PX, are you telling me I'm supposed to risk my life and go underground to help them? That's insane. I could die. Me. You're supposed to stand up for what is right and not let people bully others. It's what makes the world PX, a better place. I know. It's stupid. I don't want to get in trouble just to help someone else. It went on like this for a while, but he was completely serious. I finally told him to stop being so pedantic and just write down the correct answer and turn it in. Point, this kid is going places, but boy, do I hope I'm not around him to experience it. I teach at a Title I read poor school, so most of mine are more serious than the top posts. Kid sucker punched his math teacher for telling a joke the kid didn't like. Point, kid who never came to school last year. True, and probably 9 days out of every 10 got so drunk on the first day of school this year that she had to go to the hospital for alcohol poisoning and almost died. When asked why her kids weren't in school more often, the student's mom shrugged and said, "They don't want to go. Who's going to make them?" Student was 12 at the time of the incident. Point, kid with such bad anger issues that every day he walked into my class with the intention of hurting as many people as he could as badly as possible. Parents were very young, 16 and 18, when they started having kids. Parents of 4 were homeless, taking care of mom's parents 2 were gang members, and dad was put in prison last year. The student was just a really sensitive kid with bad social anxiety who needed counseling and a stable home life, neither of which his parents were willing/able to provide him. Point, homeless kid with dad from a large and unsupportive family full of kleptomaniacs who took the supplies given to him by the school and, I don't know, pawned them. Never has his stuff, never has his work, has a hard time concentrating. Point, most kids would be okay in the right family environment. Some families can't or won't provide the support needed by that child. If the kid doesn't have the strength to rise above their upbringing, they are not going to make it. It's as simple and tragic as that. Not a teacher, but a student. In 3rd grade I was in the same class as this kid, let's call him Colin, who had severe anger issues. Our teacher organized the students into table groups, and he and I, along with 2 other girls, were in the same table group. Point, he wasn't the smartest, and always performed badly on tests and quizzes. When my teacher would ask him to answer a question, he'd make up some random answer that made no sense. He would hit the table with his head and hands when he got frustrated, and frequently snapped pens, pencils, markers, and whatever in half. We, my table group, along with the rest of the class, hated him. I'm pretty sure my teacher did too. He frequently visited the school counselor, but unfortunately he could not be put in special ed because he didn't qualify or something like that. The teacher got frustrated with him often, and he was quite rude to her. One time, the Friday before April Fool's, which was on a Monday that year, we got test scores back. I, along with the rest of my table group, did very well. He did poorly and became angry at us for being "better than him." He started to say some things, and for some reason my 9-year-old smartass told him to shut up. This angered him greatly, and he threatened to hide all my school supplies on Monday as an April Fool's joke. I told the teacher, and she told me that she would make sure it wouldn't happen. Lo and behold, that Monday, when I came into class, I couldn't find any of my sheet. It turns out, when the teacher had stepped out to get something from the printer, he had took my pencil box from her desk. She had it there so that he wouldn't take it, hid all of my things. When we asked him to tell us where everything was, he refused, and for the rest of the day sat on a chair in the corner of the classroom as a punishment. A few weeks later, he had a very violent outburst. The teacher, worried for our safety, gathered the students at one end of the classroom. He threw a chair at the poor woman and just tore up the classroom. He was out of class for a few weeks after that, for treatment I guess, but he returned all the same. He was a real asshole. Late to the party, but I have to share. Obligatory, not a teacher. I took an intensive 2-year software development course at a technical college. It was absolutely brutal, but those of us that survived were given a golden ticket to a better career, so it was worth it. The failure rate was close to 55%, mostly due to poor time management. But I will never forget Bizarro James. This poor kid would sit through class quietly and then towards the end of at least one class a day raise his hand to ask a question. I think he thought he had to ask a question, as if the teacher were keeping track. After a month or so the teachers started to sigh. When his hand went up he would spend a solid 2 minutes on a breathless, rambling question that related to something we'd been taught and tested on weeks ago. After the first half of his question his eyes would wander away from the teacher. I think he was talking to himself at that point. When he'd finish there would be this moment of awkward silence as the teacher tried to process the free-flowing nonsense and then just ask Bizarro James to see them after class. To my knowledge he didn't point the first day of the second semester. I'm hanging out with a couple of guys from my class talking about our marks from the first semester. Bizarro James shuffles up to us and asks what we are up to and then says, "Oh, you guys can see." So we go back to his table and pop open his laptop and I show him how to get to his marks. And we are looking down the low numbers and he says, "What do those W's mean?" To which I have to reply, "Those mean you failed, James. You're not allowed to be here anymore." He literally had no clue that he'd failed out of the first semester of the program. He just showed up to the second semester because that's what he thought he had to do. He packed up and I never saw him again. I have no idea who thought it was a good idea to waste several $1,000s on sending him, but I hope he ended up in a better place. This reminds me of the Kevin story from a few years ago. Not my story, just copied. It's not uncommon as a teacher to have students who are a bit behind the curve in certain aspects, but 99.99999% of the time they are keen on something. They might not understand how to identify a noun or what theme is, but they somehow know how to make a mean plate of nachos. You learn pretty quick to not judge fish for their tree climbing ability. Yeah, I know, I thought this was the rule when I was teaching until I met Kevin. Kevin isn't his real name, but it doesn't matter because he can't spell it anyway. Kevin was a student of mine during my last year of teaching. He came to my classroom with very little to show for his academic past. He had moved a few times and thus was missing a lot of typical test scores that we used to try and ballpark their ability. Don't worry, it was a ballpark. We didn't make major decisions until we actually had a chance to talk and work with a student for a bit. I thought that's fine. I'll just do some one-on-one with Kevin and see what's up. One-on-one with Kevin was like conversing with someone who'd forgotten everything in a freak, if not impossible, amnesia incident. There was no evidence that he had learned anything past the second grade, and now he was in 9th grade. Flabbergasted, I figured we needed to get more serious with this. If he was going to be in my class, I needed to know why and how. I decided to meet with him, his guidance counselor, his parents, and another teacher to see what was really going on. This is where it all became clear. It was by some incredible fluke that his family hadn't been wiped off the face of the earth years ago. Odds are his entire heritage was based on blind luck and some type of sick divine intervention that saves his family every time a threat presents itself. Kevin was the genetic pinnacle of this null achievement. Even my instructional lead, a woman who could find a redeeming tray in a Balrog, failed to see any reason this kid or his family should be alive today. So here's a list of events that made it abundantly clear that God exists, and he's laughing uncontrollably. Kevin frequently forgot when/where class was. On more than one occasion, I had to retrieve him from other classrooms. Kevin ate an entire 24-pack of crayons, puked, and then did it again the next day. This is 9th grade. I have no idea where he got crayons. Kevin's dad wrote tuition checks and mailed them to me, his English teacher. This was a public school. When I gave it back to Kevin, voided, to give to his dad with a brief note explaining that this is a public school, Kevin got in trouble for trying to spend it at 711 after school. Kevin was removed from the culinary arts program after leaving a cutting board on the gas stove and starting a fire. Twice Kevin threw his lunch at the school resource officer and tried to run away. He ran into a door and insisted it wasn't him. Kevin stole my phone during class. I called it. It rang. He denied that it was ringing. Not that it wasn't his. Not that he did it. No, he denied that the phone was actually ringing. He tried it 3 times before the end of the year. Kevin called the basketball coach a motherfucking beach during gym. Basketball tryouts were that afternoon. Kevin tried out. It didn't go well. Kevin's mom could never remember which school he went to. She missed several meetings because she drove to other schools, none of which he ever went to. Kevin tased himself in the neck before a football game. Kevin kept a bottle of orange Kool-Aid in his backpack for about 4 months. He thought it would turn into alcohol. He drank it during homeroom and threw up. Kevin said the N-word a lot. Kevin was white. The high school was 84% black. Kevin got beat up a lot. Kevin stole another student's iPhone and tried to sell it back to them. Kevin didn't understand that his grade was dependent on tests, quizzes, homework, class walk, and participation. Kevin finished his first semester with a 3% average. He tried to bribe me with $11. Kevin spit on a girl and said you should get out of those wet clothes. The girl was the Spanish student teacher. Kevin didn't know dogs and cats were different animals. Kevin tried to download porn onto a computer in the library at the circulation desk while he was logged on. Kevin asked a girl to prom. He was in 9th grade and freshmen don't go to prom by asking for her phone number and then texting her his address. Kevin got gum in his hair constantly. Kevin regularly tried to cheat on assignments by knocking the pile over, grabbing one before I had picked them all up, and then writing its name on it wherever there was room. Kevin had several allergies, but neither his parents nor he could remember what they were. They were very concerned that the holiday party at high school, we don't have those, would have peanuts. When they finally got a doctor's note, he was allergic to amoxicillin. Kevin and his parents took a trip to Nassau. How the fuck did they even get airline tickets and forgot all their luggage at home? I didn't believe him when he told me until I talked to him mom, who told me first thing when I saw her at the bi-weekly meeting. Kevin's grandfather apparently died in a chainsaw accident. I can only assume God was looking the other way that day. I teach grade 7, so most of them are salvageable. I tend to not look at a 12-year-old and go, okay, this one is probably faked for good, and write them off. However, I had a kid who refused to do much of anything other than sit in class and smile and occasionally talk. He never would answer class questions and didn't care a whit about his grades. All 4 core teachers notice this, and so we arrange a PTC to get some interventions in place. Dad shows up stinking drunk, unshaven, walking oddly and in extremely dirty clothing. Mom, who is at least a decade younger, shows up wearing, in November, short shorts and a Forks fur coat, nothing underneath, half zipped up, also at least tipsy. This is at 10 am. Nothing gets done of any value. After a few more times trying to get the kid to work on anything, I finally ask him, so, what are you going to do when you're an adult and on your own? How are you going to get food to put in your head? I'm gonna have a settlement check. A what? A settlement check. My dad gets a settlement check every month. So, why does your dad get a settlement check? I don't know. Does your dad have something really wrong with him? A serious injury? A missing body part or two? He's only got one leg, that's why he gets a settlement check. So, are you looking to lose a limb to make a living? Sure. I'm a student, but I have a few stories. I've told this first one here before, so I'll make it short. After the Paris terrorist attacks, he posts to Instagram saying they deserved it because of the way they treated Africans in the 1500s. I think he was trying to stand out while being PC. I asked if that means everyone who died in 9/11 deserved it, and his completely serious answer was, but that was the government though. Sophomore year, this freshman asks me to help him with an English essay that's late. Only thing he hasn't done is the works cited page. I had his teacher the year before and that's literally the first thing he taught us to do. The dude bugged me for a month to help him. I would always ask why he doesn't go to his teacher and he'd say he doesn't need help. I'd ask him why he's asking me for help if he doesn't need it, and he'd say, because the paper is late. He also begged a buddy of mine to hang out, so he'd have an excuse not to turn it in, as if the teacher would take that as a legitimate excuse. The other day in my science class, this dude was being so annoyingly disruptive the teacher had to call the security guard to come make him go to the detention room. This was after a good few minutes of "I'm tired of your crap, go to the detention room." Nah, I don't need to, I'm good. Last year in my science class, we'd have a double period every other day, and we had short breaks in between periods. One guy, not the same as above, doesn't come back before the bell rings, so the teacher locks the door as a joke. The dude comes back, jiggles the handle, and shouts yo, faking let me in. The teacher goes outside to talk with him, and 5 seconds later he shouts what? What did I even do? 1 guy in my grade would go off campus to smoke weed, and then come back, reeking of the smell. He got caught with weed on campus, but that's not why point. The reason he was caught was because of another guy who one day repeatedly passed him notes asking for weed. He'd just tear them up and ignore them, but the notes kept coming. Eventually, the teacher sees and grabs a note. The guy who was passing him the notes was arrested for drunk driving and possession of heroin. When he was 15. Our school district is actually pretty decent, except for these dim lights and a few others. Former grad tar here. Taught a number of 101/3 biology labs, basically, all the non-science type majors, and the 153/5 labs, science type majors, and I can tell you that both classes had kids that made me go oh, honey, you definitely are not ready for college. Prime example was this English major in my 103 lab. Here's a couple examples from her. Is this pond water supposed to look black? Me. Plug in the microscope and turn it on. Note, she came from a big high school, so she definitely should been exposed to microscopes before college. Comes in for the botany lab, picks up the strawberry that's being used as an example of an accessory fruit. Is this the flower we're examining for lab? Me. No. That's a fruit. Note, the state she is from is the same state the college is located, and the state is very rural, and the college has a very good agriculture program. One kid that was another TAR student turned in the one and only lab report of the semester 2 weeks late, complete with chat acronyms and slang. I had one kid in my 153 lab that took the cake, showed up for the first day of lab, didn't show up for any of the following until the first lab exam 7 weeks later. He bombed that one. Didn't bother showing up for the rest of the semester either, until he came to my office the last week of the classes, begging for extra credit. Me. Pulling up the spreadsheet where I kept track of all the grades. Let's see. According to this, you only showed up twice over the entire semester. Why should I put forth any extra effort for you when you couldn't even put forth the required minimum and show up for lab? Kid started ranting and raving how I was supposed to help him. He was gonna fail if I didn't. That I was a total beach. Not denying that. And he was going to go to the professor and get me in trouble. Yada yada yada. Point me. Knock yourself out. Gar is in his office right now, just a couple doors down. Yeah, I was totally on a first name basis with the professor, who was also my grad advisor. Kid didn't know this, or that Gary was up to date on the lab grades. A couple minutes later, I could hear Gara's voice pick up as he taught this kid a new 1 point. Welcome to the real world, kid. Not a teacher, but I went to an entirely special ed school for 2nd grade, and in all honesty most of them fit this question. The school was mostly students with ADHD or autism, but there were kids of just about any mental or physical disability. Though most were just mentally disabled, there was not a day that went by where there wasn't some kind of major behavioral outburst. Kids would often throw heavy objects at kids, and kids would walk in desks and scream obscenities. One kid in particular would hit me every day. One time he even threw a desk at me. Luckily he missed. We even had a standard procedure for this kind of incident. There were always 2 teachers assigned to a classroom, and whenever a freak out occurred one of the teachers would escort the rest of us out of the room, while the other teacher attempted to calm down the kid. A lot of these incidents were worthy of being a deleted scene from The Exorcist. They honestly scared the shit out of little 2nd grade me. Someone had the bright idea to teach karate as a replacement for 5th edition. They didn't a proper gym for any kind of sports. This combined with the violent nature of some of the kids made for a bad combination. This basically turned the school into a psycho-elementary martial arts proving ground. The place was just all around scary. I consider myself a decently tough person, but I still get shivers thinking about that school. Most of the kids are probably in prison by now. As an adult I lost my diagnosis. I recently wrote one of the teachers at the school informing her I graduated high school and that I'm headed for the US Navy. She wrote back to me saying I was one of the only students she had that she knew for a fact has graduated. She said the only other kid who wrote to her was from prison. As bad as the school was, I still have tremendous respect for the teachers who put up with it every day. I'm an elementary school teacher. I teach 5th grade now, but I've also taught 2nd and 3rd. I also run Saturday remedials for high school. Up until this year, I ran middle school remedials as well. I find most of my middle and high school kids never fit the bill, but the primary kids I really worry about. The most memorable comes from a 2nd grader. Let's call him CJ. In 2nd, we were doing a lesson on writing to persuade. Most of our writing is very integrated into our other subjects, but when we have something that we haven't managed to cleanly integrate yet, we have a standalone writing lesson. This lesson was tied into authors PI, persuade, inform, entertain, the 3 main authors' purpose identifications for this age group. We were discussing rhetorical strategies for persuading. We had already close read an example and shared how we thought the advertisement was trying to make us feel, created a class example, identified other possible examples we had seen in the past, and even gone through an exercise where students considered the ways they might try to convince others why they deserve to stay up 10 minutes later than bedtime. So we had identified most of these rhetorical strategies, and now we were just putting a name to each and clarifying the reasons why they might work. About halfway through the lesson, we had discussed bandwagon appeals, we called it appeal to popularity, and we had discussed moral/logical appeals. We were then discussing appeal to authority, we called it expert opinion. We had discussed it and gone over examples. Dentist commercials were the big aha moment that they could connect with. We had discussed why it worked. Why do you believe me when I tell you something, but not always your friends? We had even started giving examples. My kids were great and engaged and definitely ready. I had already worked with CJ for half a year, so I knew that he would be quick to raise his hand, slow to actually answer, and almost always wrong. I quickly learned that, while with most kids who are performing very far below grade level in reading, for example, CJ was still working on moving past identifying words and onto understanding meanings of groups of words. Would choose to only respond when they knew a topic. CJ would instead raise his hand for every topic, no matter what it was or what he knew, and make a guess CJ didn't have and still doesn't, despite testing any educational or learning disabilities, no cognitive function issues, or anything like that. He's still a student who, in 6th grade now, receives no special services. He's just a little slow. So, when I saw his hand go up, I just called on other students. I heard Barack Obama says you should vote today. John F. Kennedy says you should always vote for your senator. Dentists say you should never brush your teeth. Scientists say that, etc. We had made some pretty clear identifications, and while I'm sure several students hadn't made the full connection to why and how these appeals would work, they did all understand the format by which you wrote them. Or at least, I thought they all did. So with all those examples to follow, pretty much all following the mimicked X says Y format, I figured that I could call on CJ and get a response that works. So I get one more kid in. John Cena says you should drink milk, and then call on CJ. He takes a breath and belts out in his loudest non-shouting voice, a runaway train. Now, keep in mind I'm a 2nd grade teacher at this point, and I'm very used to wrong answers and redirection. I can take most things and either push them towards the correct answer or redirect the question to a neighbor, while never actually saying no, so that students don't feel discouraged. But I was just stunned. There was absolutely no connection from his thought process to anything we had discussed. We hadn't talked about engineers, trains, planes, vehicles, or travel of any kind. It's still something I laugh about. Several comments/questions from different students, but 2 of my favorite. Early in the morning, student raises a hand. Yes, that today's date. Pointing at the whiteboard. Me, no, I forgot to change it. It's yesterday's. Confused face, a few seconds of pause, then, so, what's today's date? Well, this one is pretty funny. I'm still not 100% convinced they weren't just messing with me. If they did, they acted their respective parts to perfection. This was a more advanced class. I was handed out papers, then, after I finished, 2 hands up. The second to last, and last person in a row. I asked the first one, what's the matter? You gave me an extra one. Okay, I go, hang on, and I'll come get it. Look at the person behind, what about you? Without a smile, and looking very serious, almost bored, you are short one. I didn't get one. Half the class started laughing, and I paused looking straight at them for any kind of sign that they were messing around to waste time. Since they seemed serious, I asked very calm, can you please run that by me one more time, louder? So they did, back to back, yet no light went on. In fact, now they were even more confused. So I said, okay, let me see if I get this straight. You point at the first person, have an extra, and you point at the second person, are one short. Correct? Both nodded. Any of you see a solution? They look lost, so acting angry I go, you give him your extra. By now, the entire class was laughing hysterically. Point the weirdest three. I was once told by a student their goal in life was to be a stripper and didn't need any of the stupid school stuff I was trying to teach them. Oh boy, this is one of those life isn't fair moments. This guy, call him Bucktooth, or just Buck, he was in my freshman class. First semester in gym, we were outside learning how to play soccer. It was painfully basic what we had to do. For example, the teacher would roll us the ball and we would kick it. Right. Just simple stuff. I go up, kick the ball, big deal. I go stand over with the other awkward guy teenagers. Buck jumps the line and gets all hyped. Teacher sighs and rolls the ball at him. He Charlie Browns the thing, and hard too, like vaults himself onto his back. People laugh. He gets up and jogs over to us and starts loudly bragging he didn't feel a thing. Reason being, he and several others took a crap ton of muscle relaxers before gym and starts pointing and naming them. Meanwhile, the teacher is standing 2 feet behind him and our faces are mortified. Thankfully the teacher knew we weren't involved. Fast forward a bit. I and another guy was sent to get some ice and wrap for an unfortunate uncoordinated soul. Buck tags along. We are taking our sweet time in the basic sports supply room the ice machine was in. Buck finds a box. In the box are little white tubes with 2 different sections. I knew what they were. All my sisters had forgotten at one point or the other and had to use these, what I'm told, evil wads of scratchy garbage. Me and the other guy convince Buck they are cigars the coaches smoke when they win a football game. We start getting the ice, and when we turn around Buck is gone. Close to the end of class, Buck approaches us visibly irritated, saying, if those were cigars they don't hit very good. He got his jet out of pity from the teachers, plus they just wanted him to go away. He joined the National Guard, pisses off his co so bad the co turned around and beat the shit out of him. He sued the National Guard, wins, and gets a $750K settlement. Point last I saw him, he was trying to pay for $10 of cigarettes with a $100 that the gas attendant couldn't break. He was driving a brand new convertible Mustang. 2 days later he wrapped it around a telephone pole. Survives, buys another and repeats around a tree. He ended up blowing through everything in less than 2 years. He odd shortly after breaking his legs jumping out of some own 2nd story window in a meth rage. Point life is so unfair it's sad. Late to the party. Point I teach senior English. I assigned a timed writing essay due at the end of the period. The prompt was about the ethics behind plagiarism. The student in question was absent on the assigned day. When she arrived to class the next day I gave her the assignment and set her aside to complete it while I taught the next lesson. She asked what plagiarism was. I gave the simple rundown about copying other people's work, buying papers online, etc. She said she understood and went to work writing. Grading time comes around and I start to think this is really good. It was too good, in fact. Plugged the first 2 sentences into the old Google and it's the first result about plagiarism. Auto 0. Conference with student the next day. The following day student enters. I say we need to talk about your essay. You clearly plagiarized and will be receiving a 0 for it. Student, but Mr. For Fortune underscore and underscore glory, I didn't plagiarize. I just copied it off the internet. Another time I was using Disney's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow to give my kids a break on Halloween and tie it back into the first American novella. There's a scene when a Chubbat gets a letter inviting him to the ball. I paused it because my students are slow readers and begin to read it out loud. A kid in the back raises his hand and asks what language it's written in. The letter was written in cursive. I told him it was British, and we moved on with our lives. He was genuinely impressed that I could read and write in British. Teacher here. College freshman composition 1, 2, basic writing, and I've seen some heavy sheet man, obligatory affected stoner voice. For instance, I had just finished giving a rousing lesson about social justice and how society can use writing to help others. We talked about oppression and monstrosity, and in general kicked us that day. This was leading up to an assignment in which they rhetorically analyzed a group that had been oppressed by society, preferably a group they belonged to themselves, but not required, and wrote an argumentative essay making suggestions for how society might write. See what I did there? This wrong point blonde girl, let's call her Becky, with the good hair, decides she wants to write about the violent and unfair demonization of the basic white girl. I was so intrigued that I allowed the topic. I wanted to see what she could do with it. She spent the entire time talking about how Ugg boots weren't as ugly as everyone made them sound, and how Starbucks was a nutritional source of food and drink. The best part? Her suggestion for righting this wrong was producing an affordable line of products in pumpkin spice and fall flavors so that everyone could enjoy them. She goes on to list some example products, the best of which is condoms. Pumpkin spice flavored condoms that were cheap so everyone could enjoy them and thus eradicate the awful oppression of the basic white girl. Not a teacher, but in the 7th grade there was this girl who was your typical teenage white skin blonde hair popular girl. Spoiled as fuck, dumb as fuck, and mean as fuck. Here are some examples of things she actually said. Science class. We were learning about the solar system and the teacher started out by asking us how many planets there were. The answer he was looking for was 8, since Pluto wasn't considered a true planet. She said there were 6. Her explanation was, well, most people thought there were 9, but then Jupiter and Saturn were destroyed in a collision and scientists discovered Pluto didn't exist. The Pluto thing was a dumb misunderstanding and apparently she thought that, even though it wasn't how it happened. The scene in the second SpongeBob movie with the colliding planets was based on true events. English teacher said her esophagus was burning and rubbed her throat. Girl asked why she rubbed her throat. We tell girl that the esophagus was the throat. Girl's mind was blown because she thought the esophagus was something in the leg. Girl brags to her friends about getting after school detention. Apparently she threatened to skip it and gave her dad an ultimatum that she would only go if he gave her his credit card. Apparently her dad gave and she pretended to be all nice to this overweight kid. I know him. He's really sweet and fun to be around. But then one day he politely asked her to be quiet, to which she responded, "Shut up you faking fatso." He cried. Said that when she grows up she wants to be a doctor, and if it doesn't work she'll either sell drugs or be a hooker. I'm a chemistry professor. One day I was looking at the transcript of one of my students that was just really struggling in class. I was new to teaching at the time and was trying to figure out if they just had trouble in my class or all of them. They were taking organic 1 from me, which means they had to pass general chemistry 1, 2, and pre-calculus to get in. If I recall, they had taken 6 semesters of a 2-semester general chemistry sequence, barely scraping by with C's. Took my class twice and could only get a D the second time and worked her ass off. The transcripts also showed me this happens in pretty much every subject. They would have to retake each class 2 to 3 times to get a passing grade. They had been in college on and off, former military, for over 2 decades and just failed everything over and over and over in the many times they came to my office hours, roughly 3 hours worth a week for them alone. It became very apparent that they had a profound learning disability that had gone undiagnosed. They got extended test time for an ad issue anyway, but that was only scratching the surface of their academic issues. Took a few more years to graduate, and I think from there they ended up going to a community college because nobody wanted to hire a BS in biology with a 2.0 GPA.